I never thought the person who would hurt me most would be the one I brought into this world. The day I woke up in that hospital bed, alone and in pain, only to discover what my daughter had done with the money meant to save my life, that was the day everything changed. Hello everyone, my name is Margaret and I'm 62 years old. What I'm about to share with you is something I've carried in my heart for years. A burden so heavy that some days I wondered if I'd ever find the strength to speak it aloud. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It was March of 2018 when my life as I knew it came crashing down. I had been working as a senior accountant at Patterson & Webb, a mid-sized firm in downtown Seattle, for nearly 30 years. I started there fresh out of college, bright-eyed and eager, working my way up from a junior position to managing a team of 12 people. The company became my second home, and my colleagues were like family. I loved the routine of it all, the satisfaction of balancing sheets, the quiet pride in catching errors that could have cost clients thousands. My cubicle on the 14th floor had a view of the harbor, and on clear days, I could see the ferries crossing the Sound, their white trails cutting through the blue water like chalk on a blackboard. My husband, Thomas, passed away 7 years before all of this happened. We had 31 good years together, not perfect, but good. He was a high school history teacher, the kind who genuinely cared about his students, who stayed late to help them prepare for exams, who attended their graduations even years after they left his classroom. We met at a community barbecue in the summer of 1982. I had just moved to Seattle for my new job, and I didn't know anyone. Thomas approached me at the dessert table, commenting on how I was the only other person who had taken a slice of the lemon meringue pie. He said people who appreciated lemon meringue were people worth knowing. We were married 14 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with just our immediate families present. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. We had one child together, our daughter Sarah. She was born in October of 1986, 3 weeks early but healthy, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the entire maternity ward. From the moment I held her, I knew my life had found its deepest purpose. Being a mother was everything I had dreamed it would be and more. I took 3 months of maternity leave, which felt both too long and too short, and when I returned to work, Thomas adjusted his schedule, so one of us was always home with her. We couldn't afford much in those early years, but we made it work. Homemade Halloween costumes, library books instead of store-bought ones, family vacations that consisted of camping trips to the national parks within driving distance. Sarah was a spirited child, full of energy and curiosity. She asked endless questions about everything, from why the sky was blue to where numbers came from. Thomas loved this about her. He would sit with her for hours, explaining concepts in ways that made her eyes light up with understanding. She excelled in school, particularly in science and mathematics, and her teachers often commented on her sharp mind and natural leadership abilities. I was so proud of her. Every parent thinks their child is special, but Sarah truly was. She won the science fair 3 years in a row. She was captain of the debate team. She volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend. When she graduated from high school with honors, I cried tears of joy at the ceremony, thinking about how far she had come and how bright her future looked. She decided to attend the University of Washington, staying close to home, which secretly pleased me even though I encouraged her to consider schools across the country. She chose to major in business administration with a focus on finance, following in my footsteps in some ways, though she had grander ambitions than I ever had. Sarah talked about working on Wall Street, about making her first million before she turned 30, about living in a Manhattan penthouse. She had drive, that girl. Sometimes I wondered if she had too much of it, if ambition could burn so bright it consumed everything else, but I dismissed these thoughts as a mother's natural worry. Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack in his classroom on a Tuesday afternoon in April of 2011. He was 54 years old. One of his students found him collapsed by his desk and called for help, but by the time the paramedics arrived he was already gone. The doctor said it was massive and that he likely didn't suffer, but I don't know if that made it any easier. The funeral was large. Hundreds of his former students came to pay their respects, sharing stories about how Mr. Harrison had changed their lives, had believed in them when no one else did. had made history come alive in ways their textbooks never could. I was numb through all of it, moving through the motions because that's what you do, because life doesn't stop just because your heart is shattered. Sarah took her father's death hard. She had always been a daddy's girl, and losing him during her junior year of college sent her spiraling. Her grades dropped. She stopped returning my calls for days at a time. When I finally drove to campus to check on her, I found her apartment in disarray, dirty dishes piled in the sink, laundry covering every surface. She had lost weight, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She assured me she was fine, that she just needed time to process, that grief was normal and I shouldn't worry. But a mother knows. A mother always knows when something is wrong with her child. She did eventually pull herself together enough to graduate, though not with the honor she had once been on track for. She moved back home for a few months after graduation, sleeping in her childhood bedroom with its faded purple walls and posters of bands she used to love. During that time, she seemed lost, applying for jobs without much enthusiasm, spending long hours on her laptop doing things she never explained. I gave her space, remembering my own struggles after college, trusting that she would find her way. When she finally got a position as a financial analyst at a startup downtown, I was relieved. She moved into her own apartment in Capitol Hill, a tiny studio that cost more than my first house payment, but she seemed happy, or at least more stable. Our relationship after Thomas died was complicated. We had always been close, but grief changed us both in ways that created distance. She would come over for Sunday dinners most weeks, but our conversations felt surface level, careful, as if we were both afraid to dig too deep into how we really felt. I told myself this was normal, that adult children grow apart from their parents as they build their own lives, that I shouldn't take it personally. But sometimes, late at night, I would lie awake wondering if I had failed her somehow, if I should have done more to help her through her pain, if my own grief had made me unavailable when she needed me most. The years passed. Sarah changed jobs twice, each time moving to a company that promised better pay and more responsibilities. She dated occasionally, but never seriously enough to introduce anyone to me. She bought a car she couldn't really afford, a sleek silver sedan that she said made her feel successful. She talked about saving for a house, about investment opportunities, about building her portfolio. I didn't always understand the financial jargon she used, even with my background in accounting, but I smiled and nodded and tried to be supportive. She was 28 years old, finding her place in the world, and I wanted to believe she was happy. Then came February of 2018, the month that changed everything. I had been feeling off for weeks, a persistent tiredness that no amount of sleep seemed to fix, occasional dizziness that I attributed to working too hard or not eating properly. I ignored it at first, the way we do when we're busy and convinced that acknowledging a problem will make it real. But when I fainted at work, collapsing in the break room while pouring my afternoon coffee, my colleagues insisted on calling an ambulance. I protested, embarrassed by the fuss, insisting I was fine and just needed to sit down for a minute. But my boss, a kind woman named Patricia who had become a friend over the years, wouldn't hear it. She rode with me to the hospital, holding my hand in the ambulance while the paramedic checked my vitals and asked questions I struggled to answer through my foggy confusion. The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices and hands touching me, taking my blood pressure, inserting in 4, asking me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10. I kept saying I felt fine now, that the fainting was just a fluke, that I needed to get back to work because we had a major audit deadline approaching. But they wouldn't listen. They admitted me for observation and ran a series of tests that stretched through the night. Blood work, an ECG, a CT scan, more blood work. I lay in that narrow hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting the small holes in them, trying not to think about how much all of this was going to cost even with my insurance. Sarah came to visit that first night. I had called her from the emergency room, downplaying the situation, telling her not to worry, that I would probably be home by morning. But she showed up anyway, still in her work clothes, her face creased with concern. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She sat beside my bed and held my hand, and for a moment, she was my little girl again. the one who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms, who needed me to check for monsters in the closet before she could fall asleep. We didn't talk much. She scrolled through her phone while I dozed in and out, the medications making me drowsy. Before she left, she kissed my forehead and promised to come back the next day. I believed her. The diagnosis came 2 days later. Dr. Patel, a cardiologist with gentle eyes and a calm manner, sat on the edge of my bed and explained that I had severe coronary artery disease. 3 of my major arteries were significantly blocked, and I needed bypass surgery as soon as possible. Without it, I was at serious risk of a major heart attack that could be fatal. He used words like urgent and critical and life-threatening, and I felt the room spin even though I was lying down. I thought of Thomas, of how quickly he had been taken from me, and fear gripped my chest so tightly I thought the heart attack was happening right then. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Dr. Patel wanted to do it sooner, but there were complications with getting the surgical team and operating room aligned, and they needed to stabilize me first with medications. Those days of waiting were some of the longest of my life. I was kept in the hospital for monitoring, tethered to machines that beeped and whirred through the nights, preventing any real sleep. Sarah visited every day after work, bringing me magazines and puzzle books, trying to keep my spirits up. She seemed genuinely worried, and I took comfort in that. In knowing that despite the distance that had grown between us, she still cared. She was still my daughter. We talked about practical matters during those visits. Who would water my plants while I was recovering? Did I need her to pick up my mail? Should she contact my siblings to let them know what was happening? I have 2 younger brothers, Daniel and Robert, both living on the East Coast with families of their own. We weren't estranged, but we weren't particularly close either, the kind of siblings who exchanged Christmas cards and caught up at family reunions, but didn't talk regularly. I told Sarah not to alarm them yet, that I would call after the surgery when I knew more about my prognosis and recovery timeline. What I didn't discuss with Sarah in detail was the financial aspect, though it weighed on me constantly. My insurance through work was decent, but it didn't cover everything. The hospital had given me estimates that made my head spin. Even after insurance, I would be responsible for thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket costs. The surgery alone, with its specialists and anesthesiologists and facility fees, would eat through my deductible and coinsurance maximum. Then there would be the recovery period, during which I wouldn't be able to work. Short-term disability would cover a portion of my salary, but not all of it. I lay awake at night doing calculations in my head, moving numbers around, trying to figure out how I would make it work without depleting my retirement savings. That's when I remembered the life insurance policy. Thomas had taken it out years ago, a modest policy through his teachers' union. After he died, it paid out $75,000. I had used some of it for funeral expenses and to pay off our mortgage, but there was still about $40,000 left. I had invested it conservatively, thinking of it as an emergency fund, something to fall back on if I ever really needed it. Well, this qualified as a real need. The policy was in my name now, and I could access it. It wouldn't cover everything, but it would bridge the gap, would allow me to pay the medical bills and support myself during recovery without going into debt or destroying the retirement I had worked 3 decades to build. I mentioned this to Sarah during one of her visits. She was sitting in the vinyl chair beside my bed, half watching the television mounted on the wall. Some talk show I wasn't paying attention to. I told her about the insurance money, about my plan to use it for the medical expenses and living costs during recovery. I expected her to be relieved, to understand that this removed some of the burden, that I wouldn't need to ask her for financial help. But her reaction was strange. She became very still, her eyes fixed on the television screen but clearly not seeing it. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. She asked me how I planned to access the money. I explained that I would need to contact the investment company, fill out some paperwork, have the funds transferred to my checking account. It would take a few days, maybe a week, but I could start the process now so the money would be available when the bills started coming. Sarah nodded slowly, then said something that should have set off alarm bells but didn't. Not then. She offered to help. She said that she worked in finance, that she understood these processes better than I did, that I should focus on preparing for surgery and let her handle the paperwork. She could be my power of attorney for this one transaction, could expedite everything so I wouldn't have to worry about it. I was touched by her offer. Here was my daughter, stepping up to help her mother in a time of need, using her professional skills to make my life easier. I was so tired from the stress and the medications and the fear of the upcoming surgery that the idea of handing this responsibility to someone else felt like a blessing. I agreed. I signed the papers she brought the next day, barely reading them, trusting her completely. She was my child. Why wouldn't I trust her? The surgery happened on a Thursday morning in early March. I remember being wheeled into the pre-op area. The bright lights overhead streaming past like stars as we moved down the corridor. Sarah was there, squeezing my hand, telling me everything would be fine, that she would be waiting when I woke up. Dr. Patel appeared, explaining the procedure one more time, making sure I understood the risks, asking if I had any final questions. I signed more consent forms, my signature shaky from the sedative they had given me. The anesthesiologist introduced himself, a young man with kind eyes who told me he was going to take good care of me. And then there was a mask over my face, someone telling me to count backward from 10, and I was gone. I don't remember the surgery, obviously. 5 hours they worked on me, rerouting blood flow around the blocked arteries, giving my heart new pathways to sustain my life. When I woke up in the ICU, it was dark outside the window, and my chest felt like an elephant was sitting on it. Tubes ran from my arms, my chest, my nose. Machines surrounded me, monitoring every beat of my rebuilt heart. A nurse appeared almost immediately, checking my vitals, adjusting something on one of the IVs, speaking in a soothing voice that I could barely process through the fog of anesthesia and pain medication. I asked for Sarah. The nurse said visiting hours in the ICU were limited, but my daughter had been there earlier and would be back in the morning. I drifted in and out of consciousness through that first night, surfacing briefly to acknowledge nurses who came to check on me, to take sips of water through a straw, to press the button that delivered more pain medication into my veins. Time had no meaning. I existed in a strange twilight state where I couldn't tell if minutes or hours were passing, where dreams and reality blurred together in unsettling ways. By morning, I was more alert, though still in significant pain. Dr. Patel came by on his rounds, expressing satisfaction with how the surgery had gone. He said my heart was responding well, that the grafts looked good, that if I continued to progress as expected, I could be moved out of the ICU by that evening and out of the hospital in 4 or 5 days. Recovery would be long, he warned. I wouldn't be able to return to work for at least 8 weeks, maybe longer depending on how I healed. I would need cardiac rehabilitation, lifestyle changes, medications for the rest of my life. But I would live. I would have more time. That was what mattered. Sarah came during visiting hours that afternoon. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She said she had taken the day off work to be there, which touched me. We talked briefly, my words coming slowly, still affected by the medications and the trauma my body had endured. She updated me on things at my apartment. She had stopped by to water my plants and pick up my mail as promised. She asked how I was feeling, if the pain was manageable, if there was anything I needed. I told her I was fine, that I just needed to rest and heal, that I was grateful she was there. Before she left, I asked about the insurance money. Had she been able to process everything? I wanted to make sure it was sorted so I could pay the hospital bills when they came. Sarah's expression flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Gone so quickly I thought I had imagined it. She assured me that everything was taken care of, that I shouldn't worry about it, that she had handled all the paperwork and the money would be available when I needed it. I thanked her, relief washing over me. One less thing to worry about. One less burden on my already exhausted mind. I was moved out of the ICU that evening as Dr. Patel had predicted, transferred to a regular room on the cardiac floor. It was quieter there, the lights less harsh, the sounds of machines less overwhelming. I had a window that looked out over the parking lot, and I spent hours staring at it when I couldn't sleep, watching cars come and go, people moving through their normal lives while I lay trapped in this bed. My chest held together with wires and staples, my future uncertain despite the surgeon's optimistic words. The days in the hospital blurred together. Physical therapists came to help me walk, Just short distances at first, up and down the hallway with a walker for support. Every step hurt, every breath was labored, but I forced myself to do it because they said it was crucial for my recovery. Nurses came at all hours to check vitals, administer medications, change dressings. Meals arrived on trays, bland hospital food that I picked at without much appetite. Sarah visited daily, though her stays grew shorter as the days went on. She was busy with work, she explained. She couldn't keep taking time off. I understood. I didn't want her to jeopardize her job on my account. On my 5th day in the hospital, I was deemed stable enough for discharge. Dr. Patel went over my medications, a long list of pills I would need to take at specific times each day. Blood thinners, beta blockers, statins, aspirin. He gave me restrictions. No lifting anything over 5 pounds for 6 weeks. No driving for at least a month. No returning to work until he cleared me, which wouldn't be for a minimum of 8 weeks. I would need home health care, he said, nurses checking on me regularly to monitor my incision and vital signs. I would need to attend cardiac rehabilitation 3 times a week. I would need to make significant changes to my diet and lifestyle. It was overwhelming, but I nodded and tried to absorb all the information they threw at me. Sarah picked me up from the hospital. She helped me into her car, moving slowly, supporting my arm as I lowered myself gingerly into the passenger seat. The ride home was painful. Every bump in the road sent shockwaves through my chest. I gripped the door handle and tried to breathe through it, reminding myself that this was temporary, that each day would get a little easier. Sarah drove carefully, taking corners slowly, apologizing each time I winced. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building without an elevator. I hadn't thought about the stairs before, but now they loomed before me like Mount Everest. Sarah helped me, taking it one step at a time, letting me rest every few stairs, her arm around my waist supporting most of my weight. By the time we reached my door, I was sweating and shaking, completely exhausted from the effort. She settled me on the couch, propping pillows behind me, bringing me water and my medications, making sure I had the phone and TV remote within reach. She stayed for about an hour, helping me get organized, going over the schedule for my medications, showing me where she had put the groceries she had picked up for me. Basic things, she said. Bread, milk, eggs, canned soup. Enough to get me through the next few days until I was feeling better. I would need to arrange for grocery delivery after that, she suggested, since I couldn't drive and couldn't carry heavy bags even if I could. I thanked her for everything, overwhelmed by her thoughtfulness, by how much she had done to help me. Before she left, I brought up the money again. The hospital had given me a preliminary bill at discharge, a staggering amount even after insurance adjustments. I would need to make a payment soon. Could she help me access the insurance funds? Sarah became flustered. She said she was late for something, had to go, but she would look into it and get back to me. She kissed my cheek and left before I could press further, and I was too exhausted to chase after her or call her back. That night, alone in my apartment, was one of the hardest of my life. Every position hurt. I couldn't lie flat because it made my chest feel like it was being crushed. I couldn't sit up for too long because it made my back ache. I tried to sleep in my recliner, dozing fitfully, waking every time I shifted position, reaching for the pain pills that took the edge off but never eliminated the discomfort completely. I thought about Thomas, about how he would have taken care of me if he were still alive, how he would have known exactly what I needed before I asked for it. I cried for the first time since the surgery, quiet tears that rolled down my cheeks as I stared at the dark ceiling and wondered how I was going to get through the next 8 weeks. The home health nurse started coming the next day. Her name was Jennifer, a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor and gentle hands. She checked my incision, which was healing well. She said no signs of infection. She took my blood pressure and pulse, recorded everything in her charts, asked about my pain levels, and whether I was taking my medications on schedule. She helped me shower for the first time since the surgery, a humiliating experience that required a plastic chair in the tub and Jennifer's assistance washing my back and hair, because I couldn't lift my arms above my shoulders. But God, it felt good to be clean, to wash away the hospital smell that had clung to my skin. Jennifer came 3 times a week for the first 2 weeks. She became my lifeline, the only person I saw regularly besides Sarah's brief visits. She taught me how to recognize warning signs of complications, what symptoms meant I should call the doctor immediately, how to care for my incision as it healed. She was professional but kind, and sometimes she stayed a little longer than necessary, just talking, helping me feel less alone in that empty apartment. Sarah's visits became less frequent after I came home. She would stop by every few days, never staying long, always with an excuse about work or errands she needed to run. Each time she visited, I asked about the insurance money. Each time, she gave me vague reassurances that it was being processed, that these things took time, that I should be patient. After the third or fourth conversation like this, I started to feel uneasy. Something wasn't right. But I pushed the feeling down. Sarah was my daughter. She wouldn't lie to me. She wouldn't take advantage of my vulnerability. I was just being paranoid, I told myself, a side effect of the stress and the medications, and the fear that still gripped me every time my heart beat irregularly. 2 weeks after my discharge, I received another bill from the hospital. This one was more detailed, breaking down every charge. Room fees, surgical fees, anesthesia, medications, supplies. The numbers were astronomical. Even after insurance, I owed over $30,000. The bill stated that payment arrangements needed to be made within 30 days, or the account would be sent to collections. Panic seized me. I called Sarah immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking her to call me back as soon as possible, that it was urgent. Hours passed. I called again. No answer. I sent text messages. No response. By evening, I was frantic. Why wasn't she answering? Was something wrong? Had something happened to her? Or was she avoiding me? That thought crept in like poison, making me feel guilty for even considering it. She finally called back late that night. I asked about the money, my voice higher than I intended, stress making me sound almost hysterical. Sarah sighed, a long, frustrated sound that made me feel like I was being unreasonable. She said she had tried to access the funds, but there were complications. The investment company was being difficult about the paperwork. These things were never as simple as they seemed. She was working on it, she assured me, but I needed to be patient. Maybe I should contact the hospital about a payment plan in the meantime, just to keep them from sending the account to collections. A payment plan? With what money? My savings were minimal. My salary was reduced because of disability. I couldn't pay hundreds of dollars a month toward a $30,000 debt. That's why I had the insurance money. That's what it was for. I tried to explain this to Sarah, but she cut me off. She said she had to go, that we would talk about it later, that I was worrying too much and it wasn't good for my recovery. She hung up before I could respond, and I sat there holding the phone, a terrible feeling settling in my stomach. Over the next week, I tried repeatedly to reach Sarah. My calls went to voicemail. My texts went unanswered. When she finally did respond, it was with brief messages saying she was busy, that she would visit soon, that everything was fine and I needed to stop stressing. But nothing about the money. Nothing about the insurance payout that should have been in my account weeks ago. I decided to call the investment company myself. It took me 2 days to work up the courage, partly because I was afraid of what I might discover, partly because I was weak and tired and making phone calls felt like climbing another flight of stairs. When I finally did call, I had to navigate through an automated system that seemed designed to prevent humans from speaking to humans. Eventually, I reached a representative, a young woman with a cheerful voice who asked how she could help me. I explained the situation. I had initiated a withdrawal from my account several weeks ago, and I needed to verify the status. Could she look into it for me? She asked for my account number and personal information to verify my identity. I provided everything, my hands trembling as I read off my social security number and date of birth. There was typing on the other end, the clicking of keys, a pause that stretched too long. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming more formal, more careful. She told me that there had indeed been a withdrawal from my account on the date Sarah had processed the paperwork. The full amount, just over $40,000. But the funds had not been transferred to my checking account as I had assumed. They had been transferred to a different account entirely, one that I didn't recognize when she read off the routing and account numbers. The room spun. I asked her to repeat what she had said, certain I had misheard. But no, she confirmed it. The money had been sent to an external account based on the power of attorney documents I had signed. The account holder was listed as Sarah Harrison, my daughter. The representative asked if there was a problem, if I had not authorized this transaction. I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. I managed to thank her and end the call. And then I sat there on my couch, the phone still in my hand, trying to process what I had just learned. Sarah had taken the money. All of it. The insurance payout that was meant to save my life, to pay for the surgery that had kept my heart beating, to support me while I recovered. She had taken it and transferred it to her own account. The daughter I had raised, had loved unconditionally, had trusted without question. She had stolen from me while I lay in a hospital bed, my chest cut open, fighting for my life. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that I couldn't fully comprehend it at first. My mind kept trying to find explanations, justifications. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she had transferred it to her account temporarily for some reason, and planned to give it back. Maybe there was a logical explanation that would make sense once I talked to her. But even as I thought these things, I knew they weren't true. The way she had avoided my calls, the vague excuses, the growing distance between us. She knew what she had done. She had planned it. She had waited until I was at my most vulnerable, and then she had taken everything. I called her immediately, no longer caring about the time or whether she would answer. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called 15 times in a row, my fury building with each unanswered ring. Finally, on the 16th call, she answered. Her voice was annoyed, asking what was so urgent that I had to harass her like this. I asked her directly, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Where was my money? Why had she transferred it to her own account instead of mine? There was a long silence on the other end. Then Sarah spoke, and her voice was cold, defensive. She said it was complicated, that I wouldn't understand, that she had needed the money for an investment opportunity that couldn't wait. She had planned to pay me back, she said, with interest once the investment paid off. It was going to benefit both of us in the long run. I just needed to trust her. Trust her. After what she had done, she expected me to trust her. I was so angry I could barely form words. I told her that money was not hers to take, that it was meant for my medical bills, for my survival. How was I supposed to pay the hospital? How was I supposed to live while I couldn't work? She had stolen from me when I was at my lowest, when I needed her most. Did she have any idea what she had done? Sarah's response shattered whatever remained of my heart. She said I was being dramatic, that I wasn't going to die, that the surgery was already done and I was fine. The hospital would work out a payment plan. I had disability payments. I would be okay. But this investment, she said, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that would set her up financially for years. She needed this. She deserved this after everything she had been through. After losing her father, after struggling to build her career. Her voice rose as she spoke, becoming more agitated, more self-righteous. And then she said something I will never forget. Words that severed the last thread connecting us. She said that the money was from Dad's life insurance anyway, that he would have wanted her to have it, that he always believed in her potential, and would have supported this decision. She was his daughter too, she said, and she had just as much right to that money as I did. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. The cruelty of using Thomas against me, of claiming to know what he would have wanted, of twisting his memory to justify her theft. It was too much. I ended the call without another word, my entire body shaking, tears streaming down my face. The pain in my chest wasn't from the surgery anymore. It was from something far worse, a wound no doctor could repair, a breaking that went beyond the physical. I spent the rest of that night sobbing, hunched over on my couch, my carefully healing incision aching from the strain. Jennifer found me that way the next morning when she came for her regular visit. She thought something was medically wrong at first, checking me frantically, asking about my pain levels, looking for signs of complications. But when I finally managed to tell her what had happened, her expression shifted from concern to fury on my behalf. She told me I needed to report this, that what Sarah had done was theft, fraud, elder abuse. I could press charges. I could sue her. But even as Jennifer spoke, I knew I couldn't do that. Sarah was my daughter. Taking legal action against her felt impossible, unnatural, wrong, even though she was the one who had wronged me so terribly. Jennifer didn't understand. She thought I was being weak, that I was letting Sarah take advantage of my maternal love. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't reconcile the idea of sending my own child to prison, no matter what she had done. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I called Patricia, my former boss, and explained the situation. I needed to come back to work as soon as possible, I told her. I knew it was too soon, that Dr. Patel hadn't cleared me, but I had no choice. I needed income. I needed to start paying down the medical debt before it destroyed my credit and my future. Patricia was shocked by what Sarah had done. She offered to loan me money, to help however she could. But I declined. I had already lost so much. I couldn't bear to be indebted to anyone else. The hospital was less understanding. When I called to explain my situation, to beg for more time to arrange payment, the billing representative was sympathetic but firm. They had policies. They had already been patient. If I couldn't make payments, the account would be sent to collections as previously stated. She suggested I look into financial assistance programs, charity care, medical bankruptcy. Each option felt like another humiliation, another consequence of my daughter's betrayal. I was trapped, physically broken from surgery that had saved my life, financially devastated by bills I couldn't pay, emotionally destroyed by the person I loved most in the world. I lay in my apartment day after day as I slowly healed, staring at the walls, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I thought about all the times I had put Sarah first, had sacrificed for her, had loved her unconditionally. Where had I failed? The weeks that followed were the darkest period of my entire existence. Each morning I woke with the hope that the previous day had been a nightmare, that I would check my bank account and find the money there, that Sarah would call with an apology and an explanation that somehow made sense. But reality was crueler than any dream. The money was gone. My daughter had vanished from my life as completely as if she had never existed, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that felt irreparably shattered. Jennifer continued her visits, though her role had shifted from medical caregiver to something closer to a guardian angel. She brought me groceries from her own pocket when she saw my refrigerator growing empty. She stayed longer than her scheduled appointments, helping me with tasks that had nothing to do with cardiac care. Washing dishes I no longer had the energy to clean. Sorting through the mountain of medical bills that arrived daily in my mailbox. Sitting with me when the loneliness became too heavy to bear alone. I protested at first, told her she didn't need to do these things, that I would manage. But the truth was I couldn't manage. Without her, I'm not sure I would have survived those early weeks. The physical recovery from surgery was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. My body healed slowly but predictably. The incision closed. The pain diminished. My strength gradually returned in small increments. But the wound Sarah had inflicted showed no signs of healing. It festered inside me, a constant ache that overshadowed everything else. I would find myself crying at random moments throughout the day, while folding laundry, while watching television, while staring out the window at nothing in particular. The tears came without warning, triggered by memories of Sarah as a child, by the realization of what she had become, by the overwhelming sense of loss that consumed me. I tried calling her dozens more times during those weeks. Every call went straight to voicemail. I left messages at first, begging her to talk to me, to explain, to at least acknowledge what she had done. My messages grew more desperate as days passed. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, that I just wanted to understand, that we could work through this together. I lied, of course. I was furious. But I would have said anything to hear her voice, to restore some connection with the daughter I had lost. Eventually, I stopped leaving messages. I would call just to hear her voicemail greeting, the sound of her voice saying she couldn't come to the phone right now. Please leave a message. It was pathetic, but it was all I had left of her. I sent text messages too, long paragraphs at first, pouring out my hurt and confusion and desperation. Then shorter ones as I realized she was never going to respond. Simple messages like, "Please talk to me," and "I love you," and "I just need to know you're okay." All of them went unanswered. The read receipts showed me she was seeing them, which somehow made the silence worse. She was choosing not to respond. She was actively ignoring her mother, who had just undergone life-saving surgery, who was struggling to survive, who needed her daughter more than ever before. 6 weeks after my discharge from the hospital, I received a letter from a collections agency. The hospital had made good on their threat. My account had been sold to collectors, and now I owed $32,000 to a company that had no interest in my circumstances or my struggles. The letter was impersonal and threatening, full of legal language about consequences and actions that would be taken if I failed to pay. I held that letter in my trembling hands and felt what little remained of my dignity crumble. I was 62 years old, had worked my entire adult life, had always paid my bills on time, had maintained excellent credit, and now I was being pursued by debt collectors for medical care that had saved my life. I had to make a decision. I could continue waiting for Sarah to somehow make this right, could cling to the hope that she would wake up one day and realize what she had done and return the money, or I could accept that this was my new reality and figure out how to survive it. The choice was obvious, even if accepting it broke my heart all over again. Sarah wasn't coming back. The money was gone. I was on my own. Patricia had been calling me regularly to check on my recovery and to gently pressure me about when I might return to work. I knew she was worried about me, both as a friend and as a manager who needed her senior accountant back. The audit season was in full swing, and my team was struggling without me. I told her I would come back as soon as Dr. Patel cleared me, which was still several weeks away. But the medical bills couldn't wait that long. I needed to find another solution. I started looking into every option the hospital billing representative had mentioned. Financial assistance programs required proof of extreme hardship and income verification. I gathered my bank statements, my disability payment records, my pile of medical bills. I filled out endless forms, writing explanations of my situation in the small boxes provided, trying to convey the desperation of my circumstances in clinical bureaucratic language. I submitted everything and waited, knowing it could take weeks or months for a decision, knowing I might be denied anyway. Medical bankruptcy was the nuclear option, the thing I swore I would never consider. Bankruptcy meant destroying the credit I had spent decades building. It meant public records of my financial failure. It meant admitting defeat in the most humiliating way possible. But as I researched the process, reading articles and forum posts from others who had been forced down this path, I realized it might be my only realistic option. The debt was simply too large. Even if I worked until I was 75, even if I dedicated every spare penny to paying it down, I would never be free of it. I scheduled a consultation with a bankruptcy attorney. His office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a discount shoe store, which felt appropriate somehow. The attorney, a middle-aged man named Stephen Chen, was kind but straightforward. He reviewed my financial documents and confirmed what I already knew. I qualified for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the kind that would discharge most of my medical debt entirely. It would devastate my credit score for years. It would be part of my public record forever. But it would free me from the crushing burden of debt I couldn't possibly pay. The consultation cost me $200 I could barely afford. Mr. Chen explained the process in detail, the forms I would need to file, the mandatory credit counseling, the court appearance. He said the entire process would take about 4 months from start to finish, and his fees for handling everything would be $1,500, which could be paid in installments. I left his office feeling sick. $1,500 to declare I didn't have any money. The irony wasn't lost on me. But before I committed to bankruptcy, I decided to try one more thing. I would confront Sarah in person. If she wouldn't answer my calls or respond to my messages, I would go to her apartment and force her to face me. Maybe seeing what her actions had done to her own mother, would break through whatever barrier she had erected. Maybe she would finally feel remorse. Maybe there was still a chance to salvage something from the wreckage of our relationship. It took me another week to work up the courage. I was still weak, still recovering, and the thought of taking the bus across town to Capitol Hill felt overwhelming. But on a Tuesday morning in late April, I forced myself to do it. I dressed carefully in clothes that hung looser than they had before the surgery. I had lost 15 pounds. Weight I couldn't afford to lose from my already small frame. I looked frail and old. I realized as I checked my reflection before leaving. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, hollowed out by pain and betrayal. The bus ride took 40 minutes. I sat near the front, gripping the pole beside my seat each time the bus lurched or turned. My chest ached from the jostling, but I gritted my teeth and endured it. I had survived open-heart surgery. I could survive a bus ride. Sarah's building was one of those newer constructions, all glass and steel, with a trendy coffee shop on the ground floor and a gym visible through the windows. I had helped her move in 2 years ago, had admired the modern lobby with its abstract art and designer furniture. Now I saw it differently. This was where my insurance money had gone, I thought bitterly. Into rent for an apartment she couldn't afford without stealing from her mother. The lobby had a security system requiring residents to buzz visitors in. I pressed the button for Sarah's unit and waited. No response. I pressed it again, holding it longer. Nothing. I pressed it repeatedly, my frustration growing. Either she wasn't home, or she was ignoring me even here. I was about to give up when the door opened, and a young man in running clothes came out. I caught the door before it closed and slipped inside, ignoring the voice in my head that said I was trespassing. Sarah's apartment was on the 5th floor. I took the elevator, watching the numbers climb, my heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. What would I say to her? I had rehearsed speeches in my mind for weeks, imagined conversations where I was eloquent and strong, and made her understand the magnitude of her betrayal. But now that I was here, steps away from her door, my mind was blank except for one desperate need to see my daughter. I knocked on her door. The sound echoed in the empty hallway. I waited, listening for movement inside. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Sarah, I know you're in there. Please open the door. My voice cracked on the last word. Still nothing. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to hear any sign of life inside. Was she really not home? Or was she standing on the other side of this door, listening to me beg, choosing to remain silent? I knocked until my knuckles hurt, until I heard a door open down the hall, and a neighbor peer out with an annoyed expression. I lowered my hand, ashamed of the scene I was creating. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah's number one more time. From the other side of the door, I heard it. The muffled sound of a phone ringing. She was home. She was right there, listening to me knock and call and beg. And she was choosing not to answer. Something inside me broke completely in that moment. I sank down against her door, my legs giving out, and I sat on the hallway floor of that expensive apartment building and sobbed. Great, gasping sobs that hurt my healing chest, that echoed off the walls, that carried all the pain and betrayal and loss I had been holding inside. I didn't care about the neighbor watching. I didn't care about dignity or pride or appearances. My daughter had stolen from me and now she wouldn't even face me. What did anything else matter? Eventually, I had no tears left. I pulled myself up using the doorframe, my muscles shaking from exhaustion. I took a piece of paper from my purse and wrote a note. Sarah, I came to see you. I need you to understand what you've done. The hospital sold my debt to collections. I'm probably going to have to declare bankruptcy. I'm losing everything because of your decision. But more than the money, I've lost you. That's what hurts most. If you ever find it in your heart to explain why you did this, to even just apologize, I'll be waiting. I love you. I will always love you. Even though you've broken my heart. Ma. I slid the note under her door and left. The bus ride home was a blur. I felt numb, emotionally spent, unable to process anything beyond the basic mechanics of getting from one place to another. When I finally reached my apartment and closed the door behind me, I went straight to my bedroom, lay down fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. I stayed there for hours, not sleeping, not crying, just existing in a state of profound emptiness. Jennifer found me like that when she came for her visit that afternoon. She let herself in with the spare key I had given her for emergencies. She took one look at me and seemed to understand without explanation. She helped me sit up, brought me water, sat beside me on the bed. What happened? She asked gently. I told her about going to Sarah's apartment, about the knocking and the waiting and the phone ringing unanswered on the other side of the door, about the note I had left, about the complete severing of hope I had felt in that hallway. Jennifer's expression hardened as I spoke. She was angry in a way I couldn't be anymore, protective in a way that made me want to cry again. "That girl doesn't deserve you," she said fiercely. "What she's done is unforgivable. You need to stop protecting her. You need to report this." But I shook my head. I couldn't. She was still my daughter. Some bonds couldn't be broken no matter how much they should be. Over the following days, I forced myself to make practical decisions. I couldn't change what Sarah had done. I couldn't make her care or feel guilty or return the money. All I could control was my own response, my own survival. I called Mr. Chun and told him to proceed with the bankruptcy filing. I attended the mandatory credit counseling session online, sitting at my computer and listening to a recorded presentation about financial responsibility, while thinking about the bitter irony. I gathered every document he requested, proof of my income, assets, debts, expenses. I signed the papers that would legally declare me broke. The bankruptcy filing gave me a strange sense of relief mixed with shame. On one hand, it meant the collections calls would stop, that I wouldn't have to live in constant fear of losing the little I had left. On the other hand, it meant acknowledging publicly that I had failed, that I couldn't pay my debts, that my financial life was in ruins. I was grateful that Thomas wasn't alive to see this. He had been so careful with money, so proud of our financial stability. What would he think of me now? 8 weeks after my surgery, Dr. Patel finally cleared me to return to work with restrictions. No more than 6 hours a day for the first month. No lifting. No excessive stress. I almost laughed at that last one. My entire life was excessive stress. But I needed the job, needed the return to normalcy, needed the structure of work to keep me from drowning in despair. Patricia welcomed me back with a hug that made my eyes sting with unshed tears. My team had decorated my cubicle with welcome back banners and had pooled money to buy me flowers. Their kindness overwhelmed me. But returning to work meant facing questions I didn't want to answer. Colleagues who knew I'd had surgery asked how I was feeling, if everything had gone well, if my recovery was complete. I gave them the medical answers, the physical truth. Yes, the surgery was successful. Yes, I was healing. Yes, the doctors were pleased with my progress. But when they asked about my family, about who had taken care of me, about whether my daughter had been supportive, I changed the subject or gave vague answers. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth, couldn't bear the pity I knew I would see in their eyes. Working again gave me purpose but also highlighted how much had changed. I tired easily, needing to rest during my lunch break instead of socializing in the break room. Tasks that used to be simple required more concentration. I found myself making small errors, nothing major but enough to frustrate me. Patricia assured me this was normal, that I was still recovering, that I needed to be patient with myself. But patience had never been my strong suit, and now it felt like just another thing I had lost. The financial pressure remained constant despite the bankruptcy. I still had to eat, pay rent, keep the lights on. My disability payments had ended when I returned to work, but my reduced hours meant reduced income. I cut expenses everywhere I could. I canceled subscriptions I had maintained for years. I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I learned to make meals stretch further, to shop only sales, to choose generic brands. It was a return to the penny pinching of my early marriage, but without the optimism that things would get better. 3 months after Sarah took the money, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a card, generic, the kind you can buy in bulk at any drugstore. It had a picture of flowers on the front, and was blank inside except for 4 words written in Sarah's handwriting. "I'm sorry. Forgive me." No explanation. No acknowledgement of the devastation she had caused. No offer to make things right. Just 4 words that felt more like an insult than an apology. I held that card in my hands and felt rage unlike anything I had experienced before. This was what she thought absolved her? This was her attempt at reconciliation? For words on a cheap card mailed anonymously, so she wouldn't even have to face me? I tore the card in half, then in quarters, then kept tearing until it was confetti on my kitchen table. Then I swept it into the trash and tried to pretend my hands weren't shaking. that my heart wasn't pounding in a way that scared me given my condition. But the card stayed with me despite my anger. I found myself taking it out of the trash later that night, smoothing out the pieces, trying to read her handwriting again, as if it might reveal something I had missed. I'm sorry. Did she mean it? Did she feel genuine remorse? Or was this just her way of easing her own guilt without actually having to make amends? Forgive me. How could she ask for forgiveness without even acknowledging what she had done wrong? Without explaining why? Without making any effort to repair the damage? I didn't respond to the card. What would I say? That I forgave her? I didn't. I couldn't. Forgiveness requires understanding. And I understood nothing about why my daughter had done this to me. That I wanted her back in my life? I did desperately, but not like this. Not with this gaping wound between us that she refused to address. So I said nothing, and the silence stretched on. Life continued in this strange new normal. Work, home, cardiac rehabilitation 3 times a week, monthly checkups with Dr. Patel. I was surviving, functioning, going through the motions of living. But something essential had been extinguished inside me. The joy I used to find in small things, a good book, a beautiful sunset, a perfectly balanced spreadsheet at work. All of it felt muted now. Experienced from behind a wall of numbness. Jennifer noticed. During one of her visits, which continued even though I no longer required medical care, she told me I needed to talk to someone. A therapist. A counselor. Anyone who could help me process what I was going through. I resisted at first. Therapy felt like admitting weakness, like publicly declaring I couldn't handle my own problems. But Jennifer was persistent, and eventually I agreed. She helped me find a therapist who specialized in family trauma and betrayal. A woman named Dr. Rachel Martinez who had kind eyes and a gentle manner that put me at ease. Insurance didn't cover mental health care adequately, of course, so this was another expense I could barely afford. But I went anyway. Weekly sessions where I talked about Sarah and Thomas and the surgery and the money and everything I had lost. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that what I was experiencing was grief. I was mourning the loss of my daughter just as surely as I had mourned the loss of my husband. Sarah was still alive, but the person I thought she was, the daughter I had loved and trusted, she was gone. Understanding this didn't make it hurt less, but it gave me a framework for processing the pain. Dr. Martinez taught me coping strategies, ways to manage the overwhelming emotions when they threatened to consume me. She helped me see that what Sarah had done said everything about her and nothing about me, that I hadn't failed as a mother, that sometimes people make choices we can't understand or prevent. But even as I worked on healing emotionally, the practical consequences of Sarah's actions continued to unfold. The bankruptcy was finalized in August, 4 months after I filed. My medical debt was discharged, which meant I no longer owed $32,000 to the collections agency. But my credit score had plummeted from excellent to poor. When my landlord did a routine credit check for lease renewal, he expressed concern about my financial stability. He didn't refuse to renew my lease, but he hinted that he might need to increase my rent to offset what he saw as increased risk. I couldn't afford an increase. I could barely afford my current rent. The prospect of losing my apartment sent me into a panic that rivaled what I felt before surgery. This was my home. The place where Thomas and I had built our life together, where Sarah had grown up, where every corner held memories of happier times. I couldn't lose it. I went to Patricia and asked if there was any way I could increase my hours, take on extra projects, anything that would bring in more income. She looked at me with concern etched across her face, and reminded me that Dr. Patel had specifically limited my hours for a reason. Pushing myself too hard could jeopardize my recovery, could even put my life at risk again. But what choice did I have? Patricia surprised me with a solution I hadn't considered. The firm was launching a new training program for junior accountants, and they needed someone with experience to develop the curriculum and conduct workshops. It would be additional work I could do mostly from home, on my own schedule, without the physical demands of being in the office. The extra income wouldn't be substantial, but it would be enough to cover a modest rent increase and give me a small buffer. I accepted immediately, grateful beyond words for her willingness to help me without making me feel like charity. September arrived, and with it came Sarah's birthday. She turned 32 on the 15th, a milestone that would have normally meant a celebration, a special dinner, a thoughtful gift. I had always made her birthdays memorable. Elaborate cakes decorated with her favorite characters when she was young. Surprise parties with her friends as a teenager. Meaningful jewelry or experiences as she became an adult. This year, I did nothing. I thought about calling her, about sending a card, about reaching out despite everything. But what would I say? Happy birthday to the daughter who stole from me and left me to suffer alone? Instead, I spent her birthday at work, trying to focus on spreadsheets and avoid thinking about the little girl who used to blow out candles and make wishes I hoped would come true. That evening, alone in my apartment, I allowed myself to look through old photo albums. Sarah as a baby, chubby and smiling in Thomas's arms. Sarah on her first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed and excited. Sarah at her high school graduation, beautiful and full of promise. I traced my finger over these images of a person who no longer existed, or perhaps had never existed except in my imagination. Who was this woman who could steal from her own mother? When had she become someone I didn't recognize? October brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. I was at home, working on the training curriculum, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another spam call, or perhaps a creditor who hadn't gotten the memo about my bankruptcy. But something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was female, professional, identifying herself as Detective Linda Morrison from the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. My first thought was that I was in trouble somehow, that the bankruptcy had legal complications I hadn't anticipated. But Detective Morrison quickly explained she was calling about a different matter entirely. She was investigating a case of investment fraud involving a company called Pinnacle Growth Investments. Multiple victims had come forward claiming they had been promised extraordinary returns on investments that turned out to be non-existent. The company had disappeared with millions of dollars. During their investigation, they had traced some of the stolen funds and found a transaction that caught their attention. A transfer of $40,000 from an investment account belonging to me. I felt the blood drain from my face. I told Detective Morrison that I hadn't invested any money with Pinnacle Growth, that I didn't even know what that was. She asked if anyone else had access to my accounts, if anyone had power of attorney. My voice shook as I explained what Sarah had done, how she had taken the insurance money under the pretense of helping me, how she had transferred it to her own account. I told her about the investment opportunity Sarah had mentioned, how she claimed it would benefit both of us, how I had never seen a penny of return. Detective Morrison was quiet for a moment after I finished speaking. Then she asked if I would be willing to come to the station to give a formal statement. She explained that what Sarah had done might constitute elder financial abuse in addition to being connected to the larger fraud case. If I was willing to cooperate, it could help not only my situation, but also the investigation into Pinnacle Growth. I agreed without hesitation. This wasn't about sending Sarah to prison anymore. This was about justice, about accountability, about finally understanding what had really happened to my money. 2 days later, I sat in a small interview room at the police station, telling my story to Detective Morrison and her partner. They recorded everything, asked detailed questions about dates and amounts and conversations. They wanted copies of the power of attorney documents, bank statements, any communication I'd had with Sarah about the money. I provided everything I had, including the torn pieces of her sorry note that I had taped back together and kept in a drawer. Detective Morrison explained what they believed had happened. Pinnacle Growth was a sophisticated Ponzi scheme targeting young professionals in the financial sector. They recruited people through exclusive networking events, promising insider access to high-yield investments. The victims, eager to prove themselves and make quick money, would invest their own funds and then recruit others. Sarah had apparently invested my $40,000 into this scheme, likely believing it was legitimate, possibly even believing she would be able to pay me back with incredible returns. Instead, the company had collapsed, the operators had vanished, and everyone's money was gone. I should have felt vindicated, should have been glad to know that Sarah had been a victim too in some way. But all I felt was a deep, crushing sadness. My daughter had been so desperate for financial success, so consumed by ambition, that she had stolen from her own mother and thrown the money into a fraudulent scheme. She had destroyed our relationship and lost everything anyway. There were no winners here, only varying degrees of loss. The investigation moved forward over the following months. Detective Morrison kept me updated on their progress. They had identified the operators of Pinnacle Growth and were working with federal authorities to track them down. Multiple arrests had been made. Victims were coming forward daily, telling stories similar to mine. Life savings lost to promises of wealth that never materialized. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars stolen from hundreds of people, many of whom had borrowed or embezzled funds to invest, believing they were getting in on the ground floor of something extraordinary. In November, Detective Morrison called to tell me they had located Sarah. She had been interviewed as part of the investigation and had admitted to taking my money and investing it with Pinnacle Growth. She claimed she had genuinely believed it was a legitimate opportunity, that she had been deceived along with everyone else. She expressed remorse for what she had done to me. The detective asked if I wanted to press charges for the theft and elder abuse. The decision was entirely mine. I asked for time to think about it. This was the moment I had imagined in some ways, the opportunity to hold Sarah accountable, to make her face legal consequences for her actions. Dr. Martinez and I discussed it extensively in our sessions. She reminded me that whatever I decided needed to be about what was best for my own healing, not about punishing Sarah or trying to repair an irreparable relationship. Jennifer thought I should prosecute without hesitation, that Sarah deserved to face justice. Patricia was more conflicted, understanding both perspectives. I struggled with the decision for weeks. Some days I was certain I would press charges, angry enough to want Sarah to experience even a fraction of the suffering she had caused me. Other days I couldn't imagine being responsible for sending my own daughter to jail, no matter what she had done. I was still her mother. That bond, however damaged, still existed somewhere deep inside me. In the end, I made my choice based on something Dr. Martinez had said. She told me that forgiveness wasn't about absolving someone of their actions or pretending they didn't hurt you. Forgiveness was about releasing yourself from the prison of anger and resentment, about choosing your own peace over their punishment. I realized that pressing charges wouldn't give me closure or heal my wounds. It would just chain me to Sarah and this situation for months or years of legal proceedings. I needed to be free. I called Detective Morrison and told her I wouldn't be pressing charges. She understood, though she seemed disappointed. She explained that Sarah could still face consequences through the fraud investigation, that her cooperation or lack thereof would determine how the prosecutors moved forward. But my part in it was done. I had given my statement, provided my documentation, and now I was stepping away. I wrote Sarah one final letter. I didn't mail it to her apartment, instead giving it to Detective Morrison to pass along. In it, I told her that I knew about Pinnacle Growth, that I understood she had lost the money to fraud. I told her that I wouldn't be pursuing criminal charges against her, not because what she did was acceptable, but because I needed to let go for my own well-being. I explained that I was rebuilding my life, that I had survived heart surgery and bankruptcy, and the loss of my daughter. I told her that if she ever truly wanted to make amends, it would require more than a card with 4 words. It would require her to face what she had done, to understand the full impact of her choices, to take real responsibility. And I told her that I loved her still, despite everything, because you can't simply stop loving someone you carried in your body and raised with your whole heart. But love alone wasn't enough anymore. I never received a response to that letter. I don't know if Sarah even read it. Detective Morrison confirmed it had been delivered, but Sarah's reaction remained a mystery. In some ways, the lack of response was its own answer. My daughter was still unable or unwilling to truly face me, to engage with the pain she had caused. And I had to accept that I might never get the closure I wanted, the explanation I deserved, the apology that was owed to me. Life moved forward because that's what life does. My 1-year anniversary of the surgery came and went in March of 2019. Dr. Patel pronounced me fully recovered, a medical success story. My heart was strong, my arteries clear, my prognosis excellent. I had survived. Physically, at least, I was whole again. The emotional recovery took longer, is still ongoing if I'm honest. Dr. Martinez and I continue to meet monthly now instead of weekly. I've learned to live with the grief of losing Sarah, have accepted that our relationship may never be restored. Some days are harder than others. Birthdays, holidays, random moments when something reminds me of her. But I'm learning to find joy again in small ways. Jennifer became one of my closest friends, our relationship evolving far beyond nurse and patient. We have dinner together regularly, go to movies, talk about everything and nothing. She helped me see that family isn't just blood, that the people who show up for you in your darkest moments are the ones who truly matter. Patricia and my colleagues at work have become family too. They threw me a surprise party for my 63rd birthday, and I cried tears of gratitude for these people who cared about me. I heard through Detective Morrison that the Pinnacle Growth case resulted in multiple convictions, with the main operators receiving significant prison sentences. Many victims, including Sarah, cooperated with the investigation in exchange for immunity. Some of the stolen money was recovered and distributed back to victims, though it amounted to pennies on the dollar. I received a check for $3,000, a small fraction of what was taken but something nonetheless. I used it to pay off the last of Mr. Chen's legal fees. I don't know where Sarah is now or what she's doing with her life. I could probably find out if I tried, but I've chosen not to. That door is closed, not locked, but closed. If she ever wants to open it, she knows where to find me. Until then, I'm focused on my own life, my own healing, my own future. I'm saving money again, slowly rebuilding what was lost. I'm taking better care of my health, eating well, exercising as recommended, managing my stress. I'm even considering dating eventually, though that feels strange and terrifying at 63. What I learned from all of this is that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places, that the people we trust most can hurt us most deeply. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew, that I could survive losing almost everything and still find reasons to keep going. My story doesn't have a neat, happy ending. Sarah and I aren't reconciled. I didn't get my money back. But I'm still here, still standing, still finding moments of beauty in a life that was nearly cut short. And maybe that's enough. Maybe surviving, rebuilding, learning to trust again, even after being devastated. Maybe that's its own kind of victory. I'm 63 years old, and I have a second chance at life that surgery gave me. I'm not going to waste it on bitterness, even though I have every right to be bitter. I'm choosing hope instead, fragile as it is. And perhaps someday, when I'm ready and if she's willing, there might be room for forgiveness and reconciliation. But that day isn't today. Today, I'm simply grateful to be alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.